would not be. It's a big concern.
Cool, we have a new Henrico representative, but, he's not here, or
and has not joined the Zoom yet, but he may.
what if that happens? I will say hello.
Okay, Town of Ashland, Mr. Martin,
Present.
Mr. Root,
Present.
Goochland County, Mr. Basham,
Here.
Mr. Goyne. Sorry, 1 second. Charles City County is vacant, I'm sorry. Chesterfield County, Mr. Plymouth,
Here.
Mr. Richwine,
Yeah.
Hanover County, Mr. Rasnick, Henrico County, Mr. Dixon, Mr. Wide, New Kent County, Ms. Guthrie, City of Richmond, Mr. Bunn,
Present.
Chair Erickson, Ms. Almond, Mr. Smith, League of Women Voters, Ms. Weisiger. Here. Ms. Rosenblum, Richmond Equitable Transit and Mobility, Ms. Rowan, Mr. Moore, CN, Mr. Gordon, Ms. Higgins, KRBA, Mr. Easter, NAACP, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Willis, RVA Rapid Transit, Ms. Walker, Ms. Power. Here. Virginians for High Speed Rail, Mr. Testerman,
Here.
VCU, Mr. Leonard. He actually was planning to attend, but just notified us that he's not feeling well. Let's see. RABA, Mr. Burnley,
Here.
Mr. Hamilton, and Senior Connections, Mr. Williams.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance.
Thank you, and everyone should have the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Can we get an approval of those minutes? Any motion? Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved that we approve the minutes.
A second.
Who seconded over here? Okay. Cool. Thank you. Any amendments to the agenda? Do we need a vote? Isn't it just a?
No, on the, just also, they can all indicate.
Just voice vote.
their intent. Yeah, just a voice vote.
Can we get a voice vote for the approval of the minutes? Aye. Right. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, are there any amendments to the agenda? Are there any folks here for public comment, or anyone online?
We've not received any requests.
I don't have anything particular to report. But, hello, it's a lovely day.
Hello.
On to new business. We have,
Do you want to do an introduction or would you like us?
Sure, I can. Today we're gonna spend a few minutes talking about GRTC microtransit. And I think most everybody here is aware that as a result of a study that was done, a number of GRTC microtransit pilots were identified. I think there are 5 of them now. The 5th one just starting recently. And of course, the service is to fulfill transportation needs in areas that really won't support fixed route service. This is an on-demand service. It uses a smartphone app or a telephone reservation. And I think that they said that if you request the service, they will come pick you up within 20 minutes, which is, I think, a pretty darn good record. The service is available now in Ashland, in Powhatan, Eastern Henrico, Azalea, and, in Chesterfield along the Hall Street corridor. So, pretty exciting to hear about how the service is progressing. We hope that this will maybe serve as a model for other service expansions going forward. And I think we have a representative from GRTC.
Yes, Jeriah Guerrero couldn't make it today, so I'm Patricia Robinson, the Assistant Director of Planning and Scheduling for GRTC.
Okay.
I do have a presentation that I wasn't sure if he had already sent to you or not.
We have not received this, so
Okay.
sit in the back and help you set it up.
You can send it to me,
All set up.
and I can share my screen. I just want to join the meeting and be able to share the screen.
While we are waiting for that, I'm happy to report the experience of Ashland. Nora Amos, our planning director, told me this morning that we have a daily usage of over 90 passengers a day. And it's called the Link. And my alternate, Don, has personal experience using it. Don, you want to share your experience?
Yeah, I've had a couple of occasions where it has come in handy. I had to put my car in for extended service. So got on the app and requested ride, and the Link vehicle was there within 20 minutes, and good delivery back to the house. And then also 3 weeks later, when the vehicle was ready, return trip. And again, about 15 minutes for the pickup. And so I see it around town all the time, usually with people in it. So it's definitely being used in Ashland.
And Ken,
Go ahead.
is this the follow-up to was it UServe or that we had a couple of years ago?
I'll let Patricia maybe speak to some of that.
Yeah, so that's actually in addition to, they're doing slightly different things at the moment. And we still are doing the UServe service. So the microtransit is primarily Monday through Friday, kind of an 8 to 6. They all have different service areas, which are service parameters.
Okay.
But that UServe is a late night, early morning trips.
Okay.
So it's run by UServe and by GRTC, and the trips come in, I think it's 4 to 6, and then again, 11 to 2. So kind of taking those gaps that we still see some ridership, but maybe not enough for a fixed route and that kind of stuff, and they go bus stop to bus stop. So instead of door to door, it's stop to stop, but it still allows you to get across multiple routes without transferring. You can just go where you need to go.
You all set, Patricia?
It seems to be taking a little bit longer to load. I'm
Okay.
really sorry.
We'll give you a minute.
I don't know if I missed it, but is there a fee for that?
Not currently. My understanding is that as long as GRTC is not charging fares,
Yes,
that
that
the
is correct.
service will be free. So,
Yep.
Nora hopes that the micro transit, the Link as we call it, is so successful that it will be expanded to then hook up to a fixed route service, maybe Virginia Center Commons or something. So people can get on-demand service by the Link, go down to pick up the fixed service and get to a broader area. Right now, it's only servicing the greater Ashland, whatever the greater Ashland community is. You can't get into town, you can't get to the airport, places like that.
Yeah, but that is a good point, because in some of the other service zones, there is a direct connection to existing GRTC routes. So yeah.
Hey, Kim, while we're waiting for the presentation, I mentioned this earlier, with, I guess, GRTC, they've had free fares for the past year or so. There was a really neat piece, if anybody listens to the BBC on Monday, on the BBC Business Daily, did a nice 25-minute piece on free transportation in Europe, the pros and the cons, and it's worth listening to. We'll get a link up at the end of the meeting, but I encourage you to listen to it and see how things will work in Europe with free transit fares there. See Jermaine.
Just get on the USB. Yeah, I haven't gotten the email yet.
So this will be pretty much in direct competition with current, for fee,
Uber and Lyft, yeah.
and taxis in general.
Well, what I would hope, and she might be able to answer, I asked Don if they obtained any demographic information from him as a rider. You know, many of us have resources that we could hop in our second car or get a friend to drive us wherever we want to go. I would hope that more of the folks that are handicapped, because it is handicap accessible, maybe don't have a car or whatever reasons, would be a greater population that would be served by this type of service. I don't know if GRTC is getting any demographics on the users or not.
Yeah, so we actually just made a survey to go out. It was kind of one of those things that you need to slightly mature before we start asking questions. So you don't necessarily want to ask a brand new service, hey, who's riding? Because that might just be the only people that have heard of it just yet. But now that we have Azalea, especially is our most seniored service since it was opening last November. So we can start rolling out the little satisfaction survey, what people would like to see, followed by demographic information on our riders, and we can see really who's using the service. And that way we can make, better service recommendations, edit our zones, make recommendations better for upcoming zones and that kind of stuff.
Tricia, while we're waiting for the presentation to load, what percentage of your customers are reserving rides via the app versus calling in over the telephone?
Oh, I just had that. It was mostly the app, like an 80-20 split, 80% app and then a few phone-based. I did notice that like Powhatan specifically was almost all call-ins, which just interesting to kind of learn that breakdown.
There we go.
There we go.
Thanks, sir.
Really, really slow.
Over those, just push me to the back.
So I'll go ahead and launch in if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you. This is just our Link overview. Link is the name of our GRTC division of microtransit service. So this is a zone-based, on-demand transit service, very similar to how you would kind of hail the typical on-demand services that we're used to, the Ubers and Lyfts, but this is a shared ride model. To fill transportation needs in areas that might not support a fixed route. And this could either be population density or maybe the locations are just spread out in a way that it doesn't make sense to necessarily have a bus route go to. We can do the next slide. Overall, riders can use our GRTC on the go app and created by VIA, and you can put in your 2 places as long as they fall within a designated zone. Riders will be picked up at the point indicated and then dropped off. So this is a curb-to-curb model. We have 5 zones launched: Ashland, Azalea, Cloverdale, Powhatan, and as of the 1st of this month, Sandston. And this presentation is going to cover how to ride, the current zones, the proposed future zones, and then our service performance. So when we go into how to book a ride, there are 2 ways. You can, first off, you have to create an account. You can do this by calling in. If you call in, all the information that the customer service is going to need to create your very first account is going to be your name, phone number, email if you would like, and then whether or not you would need a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So that is the account settings there. They also do ask you your communication preference, and that's just to give you a phone call, automated phone call or text when you've booked a ride and before they show up, before your vehicle arrives.
Can I ask just some minutia?
Yeah.
Like your call center, how many people do you have manning your call center? Do you know? I mean, I'm just curious because Senior Connections offers a certain kind of service, and I'm trying to compare our service to everyone else's that I hear about.
Yeah, I can absolutely have Jariah follow back with you, because I'm not sure how many reps we have. We do cross-train everybody though, so everyone answers for fixed route, for microtransit, for paratransit.
Right.
To kind of spread that around.
I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay. From there, you can book a trip. If you call in and book a trip, they just need to know the addresses of where you're going from and where you're going to. And you can carry up to 3 additional passengers with you in your trip. So everyone doesn't need to book a separate, just one person calling in is fine. After that, if you'd rather do it yourself, you have the app. You can do it from the Apple Play Store or from the Google Play Store. It's our logo there. And it's the same exact questions to create an app. It'll verify your phone number first. And once you put in your phone number, it'll text you back and send you a link to verify. And it'll ask your first name, last name, vehicle accessibility preference, and email. Yeah, perfect. And then from there to book a ride, it's very familiar platform for most if you've used the other on-demand services. Anything in the dark gray section is grayed out. That is not part of that specific zone. So you're entering where you'd like to go and where you'd like to be picked up, or just placing the little pin on the map directly. All right, and then the booking, it does give you an estimated wait time. This is one of our longer estimated wait times to use as an example. On that right side in very small green print, it does have an estimated 24-minute wait time. So it kind of gives you that what to expect, so you can know at that point if you'd like to book a trip or not. And so if you go out of the screen at that point, you have not booked a ride. If you click the blue book this ride button, then your estimated wait is 24 minutes for that specific trip. Just moving through for our current zones, we have Azalea that opened November 13th, so this is our longest running. Oh, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Well, I will mention the Azalea covers GRTC's old Route 93 that kind of replaced this service. It was a limited service route with very limited number of destinations as well. So this actually, the service allows us to cover a greater area as well as have a greater span of service. So the service is open from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. in Azalea, Monday through Friday.
Sorry, I think the weather is affecting the Wi-Fi connectivity, so
okay.
it's
Log
just,
me out.
you had to log out
Come
and log
back in
back
now.
in.
So I gotta wait for a second.
That's okay.
Janice, I think you're host right now.
Okay.
So just give me a second.
Patricia, could you repeat the hours you just said?
Yeah, it's for Azalea specifically, it's Monday through Friday, 5 to 8.
Are they all similarly timed or are they all very different depending?
Similar,
Okay,
but we do have a little bit of a variation depending on what the preference was for the jurisdiction, as well as our implementation team felt the needs were for that area.
great.
And the great thing about microtransit is it is so flexible. So we've had instances where people are just outside of the zone and maybe call in, and we've been able to make slight adjustments to cover different areas. So we definitely encourage that. If you notice an area that's just outside of it, we'd be happy to take a look at that and see the additional cost or vehicle needs associated with it. Oftentimes, it's none to very little, so they're quick and easy adjustments.
Are there multiple vehicles operating in each zone?
Yeah, each zone has a minimum of 2, and there is usually 2 shifts, so they kind of overlap during a peak service time and then go back out. We're also kind of exploring maybe doing one as a backup board almost, kind of like we do with fixed route. We have so many zones now that having someone stationed as a just in case at GRTC, because then you're still kind of centrally located between the 5 zones. might be our next step, just to deal with influx of passengers and riders. Okay. Sorry, slide 14 if you can. Next up is our Cloverdale zone. This one launched March 11th, and it's Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Let me be specific, it's not a 2-hour service. You'll see all of these curb to curb, fare free. This one does connect to GRTC's fixed route 1C at its kind of like northeastern section there. Next up, we have Ashland, and that launched March 18th. These 3 zones kind of launched 1 week after another for 3 weeks, just to make sure we had enough time to do ribbon cuttings and that our marketing team could dedicate time to each zone's launch party. Ashland is running 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., so a little bit later of service. And they actually have Saturday service as well, and that's 8 to 11. We have our Powhatan zone, which is our most rural of the zones. It's Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And that launched March 25th. And then we have our Sandston, which is, like I said earlier, just started this month, so it's exciting to have a new one launch. And it's Monday through Friday, 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. currently. And this one does connect to our 4A, it connects to RIC, it goes to White Oak Village, and we also have some of our connecting routes there as well. So we have our 7A, 7B, and our 91 that all are fixed route services that tie into the zone.
Sorry, I'm trying to keep track in my head. So 2 of the 3 have GRTC connections into the city, or 2 of the 5, correct?
3 of the 5, Azalea does as well, yeah.
Azalea does, okay, great.
And then as far as our future zones, we have Broad Rock, Cherry Garden Zone. This is providing connection south side and kind of giving us a zone south of the river. Connects to Southside Plaza, which will again connect to GRTC's fixed route system, and likely replace our current 86, which is one of those very limited service, hourly at best, routes that would really benefit the area by being a more cohesive system that can get them more areas. And then next up, we have our Montrose White Oak Zone. If you overlay the maps, you'll notice a lot of what we did with Sandston is in this zone. We're just excited to be eager. So we had them separated as 2 zones and then kept seeing the growing need to add more and add more. When it comes to Montrose, this is still a need, this is still areas we'd like to cover. Whether it's 2 separate zones or we just merge it with Sandston is yet to be decided, but we're kind of leaning towards probably just merging it all together and having one zone if that seems operable.
Is there a schedule for instituting these future zones?
FY '26. It's as much of a schedule as we have.
Patricia, does that zone edge into Verina at all?
I can't quite tell actually.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where Route 5 is.
Look like it.
Yeah, I might just miss
I
it,
think it's a little bit west.
but I can grab that boundary and send it to you. Yeah. And then we just kind of have our metrics here, our service performance, zone by zone. So of course, we started Azalea back in November and we saw its continual increase and grow. It is starting to plateau, so we did see a little bit of dip last month in its service for the first time. That could be vacation season, heat, students. It could also just be reaching its plateau naturally. We do expect every zone to kind of hit a natural cap. So we're kind of seeing where that one levels out. Cloverdale is in blue and it's steadily growing, seeing an increase in May and June with some additional marketing efforts. So it's kind of nice to see those numbers coming through and showing that. Ashland is our green zone, currently the leader last month in ridership. So it really has had a quick success. Its leadership has been really strong in supporting this and supporting the marketing efforts and really getting the word out. So that's Also just really exciting to see the growing zone. And then we have Powhatan. Powhatan did a soft launch in March, and we actually didn't see any ridership until they did their official ribbon cutting in May. The other zones did the ribbon cutting and the launch kind of all in one. This was the only one that did a soft launch, and those are the effects of that we're seeing.
So do you all have your own fleet of vehicles or?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we're running this internally completely. So we have drivers as well as vehicles, and the operators do not need a CDL to operate these vehicles since they're a little bit smaller, so we're not necessarily competing with ourselves. We have different.
Are they vans or cars or?
A lot of them, we're kind of on a mix. A lot of them are like the body on chassis vans that can hold, not sure how many.
13?
Yeah, 13 with one wheelchair, yeah. And then we're, since this is just growing and growing and growing, we're kind of constantly grabbing 2 and 3 and 4 vehicles as we can too. So we have more coming, we have a couple electric vehicles coming for the service that we're excited to see how they do and see how they run before we get more.
Good.
But they are all ADA accessible currently. And then again, also looking into that, we might shift and maybe have a couple or one that is just a sedan moving forward. So we have Azalea here for our service performance, and this is just for the month of June, but we have each zone's breakdown. Our average daily ridership is 116 individuals with a rideshare model of 65%. And that's important because that really is showing effectiveness of resources, as well as just following that model of where a 30% shared ride is our goal. That we really do expect people to be sharing the rides in some capacity. And the average wait time for this zone is 17 minutes.
Do you all track, this will be kind of interesting, I like the idea of a shared ride concept, but I can think about some of, years ago, some issues with the, what was the GRTC on demand, I can't think of it,
Care.
Care, yeah, the caravan. I can remember some elderly people telling me, I did it, but I was at the end of the route and ended up taking what should have been a 20-minute ride, ended up taking me 2 hours. And so do you all track that metric on, with Google Maps, I know from point A to point B, it should be X. And with this, I'm averaging X plus Y on average trip length.
Yeah, I'm
Does that
not
make
sure
sense?
that's actually, it does, yeah, it doesn't, I don't think that's in the system currently. But I do have our microtransit data analyst who's been here all of 2 weeks, to maybe note to self, and we can kind of look at that going forward. That'd be interesting to see.
We'll talk offline, but like I said,
Yeah.
because I really recommended this to some elderly friends that really couldn't drive, and they loved it until suddenly my 15-minute trip to my doctor's office was 2.5 hours, and they were like, man, I just can't stay with the bus that long.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I don't think we've seen anything quite that high, but yeah, that's definitely something for us to, yeah. Next up, we have our Ashland zone, which averages 97 passengers per day, and it's sitting at about 56% of rides being shared with a wait time of 15 and a half minutes. And our Cloverdale, which has a little bit less at 17 people average daily, 25% of the shared rides, and almost a 12-minute wait time. And this is one of those that kind of all of these, we've seen the shared rides when the ridership is low, of course, just being very low. There's not enough occurrences of ridership that we would actually see people overlapping, but as ridership grows, we have seen all of the routes increase the shared trips to be an appropriate level. And then Powhatan's average ridership is about 4 people a day, with 27% being shared, and a little bit higher of wait time, 22 minutes. This one does have a slightly different metric. So the other 3 zones where they are more populated, our standard is that 80% of the trips will fall under 20 minutes is the goal. Powhatan's is a little bit larger because of the size of that zone. It's actually 60 minutes. 80% of the trips are supposed to be under 60-minute wait time. Luckily, we've not seen anywhere near that as a wait time.
One more quick question. Do you dispatch centrally or do you have multiple locations where the vehicles are based to cut down on wait times?
Yeah, so, they actually don't get trips assigned to them until they're in their zone. So the vehicle has to be in its designated geofence before it can pick up a trip.
So it's dynamic scheduling then?
Yes, yeah, it's completely on demand, and we have recommended staging locations, and those are kind of things that we're always changing to based on where we see a bunch of pickups. If we need to slightly adjust our staging area, that we can do that, or if there's a better staging area for the operator needs, we can also kind of accommodate that to pick people up quickly.
Tricia?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about what GRTC's budget is for advertising for these zones, like within the communities that they pop up in. And I wonder if you can answer that, or if maybe that's a budget question.
Yeah, I can follow up with our marketing department though and see what they're allotted for
Yeah.
each zone.
Yeah, I'm like curious about Powhatan, for example, because I know that there was a little bit of pushback from Powhatan's leadership, even as the service was coming online. It wasn't as open as the other zones were, so just wondering like how they're getting the word out about it now and what GRTC's role is in that, and yeah, how we can kind of look at that.
Yeah, I can follow back up with you.
So is this a service that Jake, what is it, the bus, let's see, what's the bus system here in Richmond?
Oh, GRTC?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Is it funded fully by the, GRC? Is that close enough? I'm from Chesterfield, so I don't really interface with that bus. So, okay.
Yeah, it is fully supported and run by GRTC, by use of, grant funding. And I don't want to speak, I think it's definitely by grant funding, as well as other funding sources. But yeah, we run it internally. All right, that's it for me. If anyone has any other questions? Yes, sir.
The funding is most of that FTA, Federal Transit Administration funds.
And what's the term of the grant, the length of the grant?
This is a 3-year pilot.
Okay.
I have a question about my own special interest, which is bikes, and I'm curious if any of the vehicles have bike racks right now, and if there's been a thought about, in addition to like a selection for wheelchair accessibility, potentially selecting like, I need a bike rack vehicle or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually been a little bit of growing pains. We thought we could grab them and retrofit them. Turns out that's a little bit harder, so we're gonna have to move forward with, as we replace them and get new vehicles, that being a key feature, because yeah, we were interested in at least housing one bike per vehicle. It's not gonna be, a ton, but
That would be great.
yeah, but that is something that was on our mind, so it's good to know that that's something that is of interest.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, then we'll move on to FY25 work program priorities.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the CTAC. What we wanted to do today was take a little bit of a break from the transportation planning process to do a deep dive into the work program for this upcoming fiscal year. So really looking at the deliverables, what the board's priorities are for this year, and then obviously how CTAC fits into all of that and the upcoming engagement efforts that we have. So just a little bit of a background, because UPWP is just one of our jargon words that we throw around, but basically the Unified Planning Work Program is the MPO's budget and work plan for the year. It covers a single fiscal year, and it basically lays out our regional priorities and what deliverables, what are we trying to actually get done, what planning efforts are trying to be accomplished. The funding is primarily through federal highways and federal transit, through the PL and 5303 programs, with the state providing 10% and Plan RBA covering the balance. So for fiscal year 25, which runs from July 1 until June next year, there were really 4 main focus areas. So the first thing is continuing to complete our federal certification recommendations. So every so often, the federal government comes in and reviews our program to make sure we're complying with all of the requirements. We were found to be complying with everything, but they have recommendations on how we could get better. And so we're trying to meet as many of those before our next certification review. The second item is making progress on federal planning emphasis areas. So USDOT has certain emphasis areas that they'd like us to look at. They're not mandated through code or federal regulations, but they're sort of a focus for the administration. And so those are areas that we like to try and include in our planning process as much as we can as well. Continuing efforts from previous fiscal years, so supporting the CBTA, continuing development of the fall line and the bus rapid transit system, and obviously our general public engagement and continuing evolution in this space as well. And then for this upcoming fiscal year, there are 3 sort of large priorities that are kind of the biggest ones for the year. The first is really a renewed safety focus. So I think we've all heard about the increase in fatalities on our roadways over the past few years. The board developed a safety plan a few years ago that was approved, so 2022 in the spring. And when we were setting our safety goals and safety targets for 2024, the board actually decided to adopt more aggressive safety targets. So we're looking at the 5-year average on fatalities and serious injuries on the roadway. And the board said those numbers shouldn't be going up. The trends are going up, but we set a level target. And because of that, we now have some emphasis on actually trying to implement that. And part of that will also be standing up a regional safety work group to try and build on what we have in our plan, to try and implement more safety focus region-wide. Some of the localities already have this, but we don't have it at the regional scale yet. The second big item is our 2050 long-range transportation plan. And we'll get into more details on that later in this, but this is basically, it's a multi-year planning process, and we're at the point where we have to update that. It's required to be updated every 5 years, so we need to start the work to have it ready in time. And then the last part of it is actually building on the microtransit in a lot of ways, and that's why we wanted to have that presentation first. It's a rural public transportation study. So the policy board back a little over a year ago provided direction for staff and the technical advisory committee to look at public transportation region-wide and help to develop recommendations for a system that was sustainable, fiscally constrained, but providing service throughout the region. So what this study is going to do is look at existing services that we have, like Bay Transit on the eastern end of the region, Dash up in Hanover, the microtransit zones that exist, and look at how we can piece all these together to provide comprehensive service even in the rural areas. So there's going to be a lot of coordination with the rural localities, public meetings out in the community, but trying to come up with some recommendations to build a broader, more integrated system out into the rural portions of the region. So what I want to run through now is really just a breakdown of how our work program's organized. So there is a link back here, and we can share this presentation later, but there's a link, the QR code. It's also on our website. If you actually want to read through the details, but it's 30-something pages. So this is the high-level overview of what's in there. So the first part of our work program is really focused on just running the program. Meetings, making sure we're on track with the budget, coordinating with federal and state partners. We also have some contingency funding. So if we have a project that comes out of the woodwork, it wasn't something we saw coming down the pipeline, we can cover that. So mainly the things that will come out of that are these meetings, a general oversight and management, and then developing next year's budget and work program. So that's the main focus of that program. The second big bucket in how we organize the work program is focused on equity, outreach, and comprehensive planning. So this is the overall broad general engagement efforts that we undertake. So Holly's leading a lot of that. But it also covers our support and integration with other planning areas outside of transportation. So where there's an overlap between environmental planning and transportation, or between housing and transportation, that kind of falls under this bucket. So some of the big things on here, that I've highlighted in bold and underlined are sort of the ones that will really involve CTAC and have a lot of engagement or focus. So the first piece of that is an update to our Title VI plan. So we've committed to updating that plan on a regular basis to make sure that we have the best information, we're following the best practices, and we're updating our demographics. Part of that is also, language access, so making sure that we know which languages we can be focusing on to provide translations, that sort of thing. The second part of it is our annual public engagement report. And CTAC, I don't think has seen this before, but one of the things that we do is annually we report on our progress from the last year. So that public engagement plan that we adopted a couple months ago, that has a requirement for us to make sure we're making progress and checking on those things. So that's due at the end of this month. What we'd like to do is bring it back to CTAC so we can actually assess how we're doing. So as part of that ongoing commitment to improving our engagement efforts, checking in and seeing how that's going. A couple of the other things that we're doing is providing support for a green infrastructure plan for the region. That obviously has a connection between greenways and tying in. It also factors into our environmental planning as we're routing new corridors, building new projects, making sure that we're mitigating and reducing our environmental impacts, as well as support for our housing and economic development work. Obviously, there's a very clear tie with transportation, so making sure that we're coordinating those efforts, that our transportation investments are supporting what we're doing in the housing space. This third bucket is long-range transportation planning. This is really the core of the agency. So this covers our travel demand modeling, developing our long-range transportation plan. It also includes all of our modal program areas. So we have 3 focus areas. We have a transit and passenger rail program, we have an active transportation program, and we have a freight program. So that covers all of those. And this is where the biggest deliverables are, the meat of what we're really doing. So the first thing is the 2050 long-range transportation plan. So again, we've already hit on that, I'm not gonna go too much, but this is really year 1 of 2. So we're only gonna get about halfway through the plan development during this cycle. Under the active transportation program, we have 2 key deliverables this year. The first is a minor update to our bicycle and pedestrian plan. For those of you that have been around, it took us about 18 years to update the plan last time around. So what we're trying to do this time is update it more regularly, especially as our localities are adopting new comprehensive plans, laying out a new vision for what the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure in the locality will be, trying to make sure that we're keeping up to date with all of that, because it is really more of a vision plan and setting out the vision for active transportation across the region. The second part of this is we'll be looking at last mile sidewalk and bike connections to transit. So that's a key connection between our transit program and our active transportation program, but it's also huge growth area. As we're expanding service, there's an opportunity to put new sidewalks, like in Chesterfield, as we have service down Midlothian Turnpike, there's not a lot of sidewalk infrastructure to complement it. So it's building out those connections so we have a functional system and people can get to the bus safely. It's also a safety focus. When we've gone back and looked, about 65% of the fatalities and serious injuries with pedestrians have been within that quarter-mile radius of a transit stop. So if we're building out the networks around the transit stops, we're also helping to address those safety issues. The rural public transportation study we've already mentioned, but that's another big public engagement effort this year. We're also going to be moving into the freight space. We haven't had a freight planner for a few years, but we have a freight planner on board. So Dorian's not here today, but he's going to be taking on freight corridor profiles updates. So this is really looking at those major corridors for truck traffic, rail, barge, all of those pieces, and building out a profile of each of them. And it's the build up to do a whole intermodal plan and intermodal strategy for the region, which we haven't updated in about 15 years. The other part is looking at rail crossings and looking at safety and freight impacts of the grade rail crossings. This region has unfortunately seen 30% of the rail crossing fatalities in the Commonwealth, and we're only about 12% of the population. So we have a disproportionate share there. So this is a focus from the board, particularly from the town of Ashland. So it's something we're going to be focusing on. So then the last piece of the program is really the short range planning. So this is the implementation side. So this is where we focus on funding and obligating federal dollars to make those projects move forward. This is also where we track our performance over year over year. So in that transportation planning process, the last step is evaluating how we did before we jump back into planning. So this is where our federal performance measures are tracked. And this is part of the safety work group, reestablishing that safety work group and figuring out the regional role. And also looking at things like congestion and bottlenecks throughout the region. That's where that slots in. So that's a very brief overview of sort of the work program and what we're trying to accomplish this year. If there's any questions, I'd like to stop here. We can kind of talk a little bit about the projects, but I also would like to, after this, go into a little bit more depth on the LRTP scope and the process and sort of where that's headed, because that is going to be a major focus for CTAC and all of the RTPO over the next couple of years.
I have sort of a two-part question, and that is, you're trying to reestablish the Vision Zero, the regional thing. How are you gonna do that? It kind of fizzled out, I guess, the last time, and then I have a follow-up.
Sure, so we had the Vision Zero work group that was established a few years ago, and they were really more of the stakeholder or guiding committee for the regional safety plan. So once we had the plan completed, there wasn't really as much of a focus for them. But one of the recommendations in the plan is for us to have an ongoing regional task force or safety work group to focus on how do we actually implement the plan. So we've identified these high injury networks, we've identified the primary corridors where we need to look at safety. So now what do we do? And so what we're looking at is trying to do something a little bit broader than just the usual transportation engineers. Bringing in planners, bringing in public health, potentially bringing in like schools, trying to broaden the net a little bit more. So then we can actually figure out what the regional role is. I think that's the other piece is a lot of it is going to be at the local level. The ability to implement a project, the ability to make a change on how your street's configured. That's going to be really a local issue that we can't necessarily touch, but we can help support. So figuring out exactly what parts of that are regional. Some of the ideas we've had so far are really coordinating education and best practices across the region. Some of the other potential things we've seen in other regions are doing deep dives on individual corridors, follow-up corridor studies to develop those recommendations for projects. So the ability for us to help do some of the planning work to get the localities in a place where they would be able to actually implement improvements.
I have kind of a second part, and that is, how would how would the work of the Vision Zero regional group interface with the safety criteria on measures of projects? When you score projects and you talk about safety, is there any relationship between that or what they can produce and the safety scores?
Sure. So I think the safety scores on how both we and the state as well are looking at projects is really based on kind of an engineering look at interventions that have been tried in the past and what the outcomes were. So it's based on a kind of a review of if we put a pedestrian signal and a crosswalk here, this is the expected reduction because that's what we've seen in the past. So those aren't directly tied in. I think where the role really comes in is being able to prioritize the projects that we do even put into the selection process. Yeah. Yes.
Well, once a meeting, I bring up the question of, does this address reducing vehicle miles traveled overall? And a few days ago, I read that we're studying how to connect the 4-lane sections of Forest Hill and Sims Avenue with the 2-lane section that joins them. And that's just one example. I'd like to see ways of the planning process, the regional planning process going forward, that we're actually reducing the need to find capacity where we already have known choke points simply by reducing the total vehicle miles traveled. A lot of that has to do with all the other things that we're talking about here. It's not a question, it's a soapbox comment.
Editorial presentation.
Well, my thought sort of follows along that same process is, when we're talking about transportation, are we talking about looking at alternative types of transportation? Just like we were talking about getting vehicle miles lower by better using people movers and mechanized, and I don't know whose bailiwick that falls in. Does it fall into GRTC, and are they looking at replacing their buses with other types of more modern methods of moving people? Because to me, the And I don't know what capacity you have to have before that tremendous investment is put in. But if we're talking about 2050, that at least gives us an opportunity far enough out to give it a think about how can we use, because we travel, my wife and I travel in Europe a lot, or that sounds not a lot, as much as we can anyhow. They've got transit throughout, and they aren't buses. They're typically people movers of some sort, trams or streetcars or something. I'd hate to think about streetcars because we were the home of the streetcar originally.
Hey, Miles, look, and I'm gonna editorialize on top of Michael too. At the same time, I know where Michael's coming from. It's really efficiency of travel, I think. But in the meantime, we've got to track, we're a growing region, so naturally VMT is probably gonna go up. Yet we're seeing counteracting forces with remote workplaces where people aren't commuting on a daily basis. So to me, it's almost meaningless to look at one variable without the others and to see hopefully the rate of growth is declining as the other trend goes up. Is that fair, Michael?
Yes.
I rest my case.
So, just to, add on to that a little bit, one of the things that we had in the previous plan is a VMT per capita. So that is kind of acknowledging the population is growing, but if we're each traveling less, that's somewhat of that balancing act. So that's sort of the, there's a absolute reduction type measure, but there's also a per capita as we're a growing region, as you said. The other thing I did want to hit on is this, I didn't mention it in here, but the congestion management process, which is the last point on this slide, is really about a lot of what the things you've just hit on. The goal of a congestion management process is to identify the bottlenecks and then come up with solutions, with capacity additions being the last option. So is there a way through better signal timing, through more bus, more active transportation? Are there other ways to solve these problems? And that's the whole purpose of that component of what we do. And that feeds into the long range plan, just like all of our other modal strategies do.
And we also, the other problem, you increase capacity when you have induced demand, so you create your own devil. Or is there a way in the transportation world that you guys look at that or model that?
Yeah, I think that's, it's one of the challenges with modeling, especially with the traditional modeling, because the demand is really based on the number of houses and the number of jobs. That's sort of how the modeling works. So the induced demand question is a little trickier on the modeling side, but I think it's something that as planners, we all recognize and trying to figure out a balance between those, right? And I think this is really a good segue into the long range plan and just the overview of what that process is going to look like. So if there's not any other questions, I'll jump into that really quickly.
I have a question. For the public engagement report, you all are gonna do that this month? And
Yes.
are we gonna go over that maybe like at the next meeting so that we can, I don't know, be ready to do really good job next year?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
So this is a very diagrammatic version of what we're doing with the long-range transportation plan, trying to distill it down into the core steps in the process. And I'll go through it really quickly, but if you were around the last time we did this 5 years ago, very similar workflow. We've got a couple extra steps that have been added in this time. So the first step in the process was really developing the data for 2050. So that was working with our localities, trying to figure out what does it look like today, and where do we think we'll be in 2050? And that's kind of a baseline assumption. We draw on a lot of data from like the Weldon Cooper, so the state's data for population projections. We look at the industries in our region and the growth that's expected in them to try and come up with that information. And again, it's built from the bottom up, working with the localities to figure out how that looks around the region. The new part, and what we're doing this time around that we hadn't had a chance to do before, is there was scenario planning that came in between. So if you haven't heard, we have been working for the past 18 months or so on a regional scenario planning effort. And as part of that, we developed a bunch of different models that all interact, that look at environmental aspects, look at housing, look at energy usage, look at public health, connect in with the transportation process. So it's basically, if we run something and look at a project in the travel demand model, depending on how the region develops, we can actually look at, well, this would do differently in the transportation model if population's more densely coordinated down these roadways, or if it's more spread out across this area. That looks different, but then we'll also see, well, there's a change in the energy use, there's a change in public health outcomes, and these are all things that we're able to interconnect. And so that's the cool thing about the scenario planning models. And as part of that, we then developed 4 different scenarios. So we have that baseline scenario just based on the data, and then we came up with 4 plausible futures of like what could happen, we don't know, but these are viable solutions that could happen in the future. So that gives us the ability to look at our projects and what we're investing in and compare them against all these range of futures to see, are these resilient investments? Is this something that's actually going to improve the region regardless of the future, or is this really focused on a single specific future that this one works in? So that's the new step that is wrapping up right now. It's going to be going to the policy board in September. If you happen to want to sit through the recording of that or the TAC meetings, they've been discussing those recently. So that's coming up. But what we're hoping to get from this is approval to use those 4 scenarios of the future land use patterns as different scenarios that we can assess against as we're doing our planning process this time around. So then we're moving into the effort that will really begin this fall. So the long-range transportation plan will have an advisory committee. If you've been through one of these cycles before, there'll be an appointed advisory committee, and they'll start meeting hopefully in October. So the first thing that we'll be looking at is the strategic direction. So what is the vision for our region? What do the goals and the objectives look like to actually measure that vision? What are the strategies that we want to consider from a high-level strategic standpoint? What do we want to look at across the region and how we achieve that vision? So this is kind of narrowing down what we're looking at to consider both the problems with the current system and then potential solutions moving forward. Everything that you see that's got the little speech bubble next to it are going to have extensive public engagement efforts where we'll be out in the community and we're going to be asking for CTAC's help to get out there into the community as well. So once we've wrapped up that strategic direction and somewhat concurrently running at the same time, we'll be moving into a needs assessment. So traditionally what we've looked at are existing studies that have been done, and we've done a little bit of public outreach, but what we're trying to do this time is add a third dimension to it, and this would be looking at more of an equitable lens. So if you've seen how the city of Richmond went about developing their plan, they did a lot more going out into the public and asking, hey, what day-to-day issues are you struggling with our transportation system? If you happen to attend our transportation forum this past year, it's a lot of those questions. What's working, what isn't working for you? And from that, we can build up proposed projects that are focusing on those issues or give more weight to those issues as appropriate. Once we have the needs assessment completed, we'll develop a universe of projects. So this is drawing on existing studies that have been done that have come up with recommendations, but there's also the ability for us to come up with other projects that may not have been identified previously. So that whole effort is going to be a lot more of a technical exercise because it's kind of compiling just different solutions that exist. But then that brings us to stage 6, which is the prioritization process and actually funding the projects. So what we look at here is a projection out of revenues out till 2050. And we say, so what can we actually afford? What could we do to achieve this vision that we say that we want? So we look at all of our projects. We will be working on developing performance measures to go along with our objectives that we said earlier. We have some, as I mentioned earlier, the VMT per capita, they're already in place, but it'll be refinement of what we already have. And then we'll be looking at what investment scenarios we can do. One of the new things we want to try this time, in the past we really just did a single investment scenario, but since we've got multiple futures and we've got multiple scenarios there, we can actually look at comparing the projects to those multiple futures, and we can also look at a pool of different investment strategies. What if we went heavier on transit? How would that look? What if we went all in on bike ped and built out the whole network there? We can look at a bunch of different scenarios and what it could look like, and then that gives the committee more information as they're making decisions on what's the best package to move forward. So once we have that list of what we can afford, that's going to be what's called our constrained plan. So that's the set of projects that we're saying we want to build over the next 20 years. And that plan, those projects will then do an evaluation on. So we'll look at air quality. Is this having any impact on the air quality? That's part of our requirements because we had issues with ozone in the past. But we'll also look at what does this do for equity? Are we actually making it better for people who have had a historic disinvestment? Or are we just perpetuating the system that's there today? We'll look at things like how much does this alleviate congestion or improve your travel time across the region? What's the economic impact of the investments that we're putting in? So this is a lot of what we did in our last plan as well, but we'd be able to do that with a little bit more information since we have multiple futures and multiple investment packages. And then once that's all completed, again, that's a little bit more of a technical exercise, so not as much public review in that piece, but we'll have an entire plan. So once we have that entire plan, we'll be going back out to the public and say, here's what's proposed. Is this good? Is this what you wanted to see? What could we have done better? And then ultimately that goes through the policy board for an approval. So this is scheduled to take about 2 years. So the deadline we have is October of 2026. And so we have to make sure that we have it adopted before then, because that's when our current plan lapses. And if that happens, we can't do any federal investments in projects around the region. So very important that we keep up with our deadlines. But this first year, we're likely to get through stage 4 or 5, somewhere in that piece of it. And really the bulk of next year would be doing the project reviews and building out those investment packages to wrap up the plan. So this is the kind of the general overview. This is really still in the works. We're still finalizing the scope. And as I mentioned, this is hopefully going to go to the policy board in September. So I'm happy to answer questions about any of the phases. And then I think Holly has some more follow-up on this one.
I'm actually curious about, so I really like the scenario planning. I think it's a really, really good tool. Excuse me. And I know that part of what we'll probably want to consider as the CTAC is how to raise awareness in the public of what the scenarios mean and the type of projects that support those scenarios. But from like an administration perspective, does it seem to you or to the TPO that decision makers and officials in the region are open to the types of projects that support the scenarios that people like? Because obviously the good scenarios are not still spending 60 to 80% of our money on highway expansion, which is what we're currently doing. So do you feel that people are still coming around to that idea?
So I think there's a couple pieces to it. I think one, the elected officials haven't seen the scenarios yet, at least formally. So that is part of what we're undertaking this fall as a build into this is like, hey, here's the different futures that we want to consider as potential options. So that'll start those conversations that would then continue over the next couple of years. I think the other part of it is, I mean, we do recognize like that if you follow the scenario plan, like our Ecotopia scenario, which is a transit-oriented development in the future, doesn't lend itself to the same types of projects that we normally invest in. But the long-range transportation plan in general, the projects that are identified in there tend to be just the bigger projects. So that's the other trade-off here is, you know, the projects that we're required to put into a plan are those capacity-related type projects. So major BRT expansion, but also the highway widenings. Those are the ones that are supposed to be in the plan by the federal code. So a lot of the smaller stuff that would be those other investments, last time what we did, we just pulled them out and had a pot of money that said, this is for all those other types of projects that don't count. So I think that's the other trade-off is what goes into the planning document won't always be those types of projects necessarily.
Sure. But that is something to like group in with the messaging. Right. Of like, sure, that at the end of this plan, we're gonna have a list that like the bulk of the money is gonna say highway, highway, highway. But like the messaging, I think, is really important of like, these are alongside all of these other things that are the real priorities to get us to where we wanna go versus the highway projects that are a lot of times about maintaining the status quo of drivability and like travel times and things like that. So I just, for our purposes, I think the messaging is really important.
We definitely agree on the messaging. I think last time we definitely ran into that right at the end, so.
What part does CVTA play in this 2050?
So CVTA is obviously
Chet's
the funding partner to make all the projects possible. Believe CVTA will have a seat at the board and help to steer the decision, since at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot of the investment coming through the CVTA. But ultimately, CVTA is the funding mechanism and the implementation mechanism for the planning effort that comes through the TPO.
Because that's to my way of thinking, that's sort of a new funding opportunity that wasn't available to some extent from years past.
Correct. So last plan, the 2045 plan was the first year that we had CVTA funding, and it opened up a whole bunch of new investment opportunities that we didn't have before. It was a much bigger pot to draw from.
But to elaborate on that, so since they control the purse strings, and there's that new layer of abstraction, if you will, does CVTA have the ability to tweak the recommendations that come out of Plan RVA, or is it just, yeah, we'll fund it or not?
I mean, at the end of the day, the CVTA funding cycle is detached from the plan. In this same way Smart Scale or any other funding program is, the funding decision is ultimately made based on the projects that are submitted, and there's no strict requirement across any of the funding programs.
They don't get the last laugh, well, that's nice, but we don't want to do that, so.
Well, I would say that the CVT is an independent authority that has control and complete control over the obligations that they make financially, as long as it's consistent with Virginia code. However, there's been an intentional effort since its inception in 2020 to keep the connection of the RRTPO and the CVTA strong together. The CVTA was obligated to develop a funding prioritization process, and that was deeply discussed and agreed upon that it made the most sense for the region to align their funding prioritization process with the long-range transportation planning process. So they do have the ability to deviate from what the LRTP calls for, but the intention is structurally we've created a situation where the organizations work together. And the reality currently is that the appointees on both bodies are the same people in many respects. Chet, did I say that fairly well? And I would note that the existence of Chet in the meeting today and the participation and sort of the proximity with which we've agreed to co-host our organizations, speaks to that coordination at every level.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Miles.
And I guess the last thing I had on this, and maybe Holly's gonna hit on it, but we mentioned before that we have an engagement strategy related to the LRTP. So the plan is to take each of these public engagement phases and bring back to you here's the outreach that we're planning to do for each of them for CTAC to weigh in on for the September meeting.
Yeah, for the next meeting. So we don't have that yet, because again, we're still developing it, but we'll have something for you to respond to, and then some steps for how you might act on that, because again, long plan, there's a lot of steps for it. So we're not gonna have every single step completely mapped out. We'll be building it a little bit, but your input will be welcome. But for this LRTP piece, my echo is strong. Sid has a poll that I'm gonna ask the room to participate in, because there's a fun activity that you get to do, is the LRTP needs a name. Last LRTP's name was Connect 2045, is that right?
Connect RVA.
Connect RVA 2045. So this is a poll that can be done virtually. So all of you, I think, have smartphones or a computer. And if you're online, then you can actually just follow the steps on the screen, is to go on your smartphone right now to slido.com or scan that QR code if you're close enough to a screen and put in that little code number, because that will give you access to the online poll. And then pick which of the names you like the best. And this will help inform our decision as we're giving it a catchy name that is clear enough to what it is, but gives us some sort of shared language around what we call this next long-range plan. And if your neighbor looks like they need help and you are tech savvy, then help them.
Oh, I do not need that.
Amtrak question for you.
Oh.
I get the right URL.
Strong showing for RV in motion so far. Numbers going down, how does that happen? Somebody retracted their vote.
Car and buggy. So that I don't have, oh, please.
Oh, neck and neck.
Train crashes up there.
See it because it's not getting any votes. I think train
Why?
Yeah, can I help you?
It has a certain political
Participate.
content.
You gonna phone?
The idea that
Transcending, we will no longer be RVA.
it's a spiritual way
No problem.
of transportation.
Great.
Are you good?
Alright, I'm gonna give you like
To me and I'll.
45 more seconds.
I'll pull it up for you.
And if you didn't get a chance to get on and get connected and you feel strongly, feel free to just grab me after and be like, this one, I like this one, that's okay. I will take that too. This is mostly just to see, you know, how we felt, where the strong feelings are. RV in motion, looks like it's in the lead. Ooh, RVA forward, coming in hot.
I like it.
Do you have more presentation?
You don't have the
Okay.
Go get your flip phone.
Okay,
cinematic.
20 more seconds.
Oh, come on.
Get your final votes in.
Wait.
Oh, go away.
Give us a second, Holly. We
Okay,
got it.
so quick, alright. 10 more seconds. Get your final votes in.
We need like 30 more seconds.
That's alright, that's okay. If you didn't get a chance to vote, it's okay. If you feel strongly, we can talk about it later. I have the printed list in front of me. Alright, Sid, you can go ahead and just close it for now and we'll move on to the next thing. Thank you all for that, I appreciate it. Just a little fun activity. So, the next section of our meeting is a little bit just of a follow-up of our last meeting. So we only get to meet every 2 weeks. And the last time, or 2 months, thank you. And the last time we met, we agreed upon some homework, right? We said, hey, we've been making good progress on our Who's in Our Community activity. We're starting to build our kind of communal knowledge of where are the places where people gather in each of our counties and cities. And I believe Sarah said to me, I like concrete goals. Let's set some concrete goals of how many groups should we be reaching out to in between our meeting times. So we agreed as a collective last time that we would reach out to 2 places in our Who's Our Community exercise between the last meeting and now to say, who can I contact, who can I talk to about who we are? And then the other thing that you all asked for from us was give us some language for what we can talk about as what CTAC is. So give me 1 or 2 sentences that I can have that is who we are and how I can talk to people. So we gave you that toolkit last time and we gave you some specific talking points about our last engagement effort that is still happening, by the way, the climate pollution reduction grant. That is still happening, but we had some community ideation sessions. And now that's related to some of our climate work and our environmental program. I wanted to just ask everyone today, how did that go? Where did you visit? What was the experience like having done that? And then what do we need to do to keep that process going? And what other things and support can we provide as Plan RVA to you as we continue to make specific steps to reach out to those communities that we identified? So who has an experience they want to share about how that went? Where did you go? Who did you talk to? Did 2 feel like the right amount?
I met with the Churchill Association's Streets Committee, which I'm already on. But I shared the information with them, and the president of the Churchill Association was there, and so I'm arranging to speak to the larger body as well.
Great. Excellent. So that's a whole group of people that we might not have already been connected to already, and because you have a personal connection, the personal ask is the most compelling. People listen because they know you. That's great. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody have any trouble getting to 2? They're like, shoot, I forgot I was supposed to do 2, Holly, gosh. It's okay if you did, right? Life happens, things get busy, but it felt like 2 felt like a good number. Does 2 feel like a reasonable number to say, hey, let's keep trying to meet that in between each session? To say, hey, two places that I'm either already connected to or I'd like to build a relationship with. Because I am sure that everybody here has at least two things that they're connected to in their own community, right?
I will say that I'm definitely new to this body, so I'm very much learning about how to speak about CTAC.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can't even remember what CTAC stands for, but I did have a good conversation. You know, I'm a community engagement manager at RVA Rapid Transit, so I'm constantly doing outreach with people. And recently we're developing a partnership with New Virginia Majority, and they're a grassroots political organizing body here in the Richmond region, and they're very interested in the impacts and the intersection of transportation justice with housing justice. And so they were asking some questions about Plan RVA, and I don't have all of the answers for them, but they're very interested in connecting. So, and I think you mentioned earlier, Miles, as you were speaking, just about with the long-range vision, connecting those types of issues, like housing and transit. So yeah, I think that there's a budding relationship that we have with RVA Rapid Transit and with New Virginia Majority, so that's exciting.
Great.
And I will, yeah, I'm happy to come here and to learn more.
Yeah. And we don't expect you all to be experts about everything, right? Like Miles had that very long presentation with all the good stuff, but he's been doing this a while. So it's okay to say, I don't know the answer to that, but let me connect you to somebody who can help you with that. And as we go, we can find out what some of those common questions are, and we can decide if that's something we need to make into a little fact sheet of information that will help you feel like you can speak about it better, or if it's time to say, you know, that's above my experience, and let me connect you to a staff person who can answer that. But ultimately, you are our outreach into the world, right? So you're doing your job by simply being there, connecting and answering and asking questions. Anybody have any obstacles? Is this a good reminder that you're like, shoot, I didn't do that, I should do it next time? And if you didn't do it this time, now you have 4, so you have to do 4 for the next one and come back. And you know, the whole point of this was to let's use this work, right? Like I felt like there was good energy around the Who's in My Community activity. We also did that exercise with the Public Outreach Committee of the Plan RVA Commission Board, which I can't remember if I told you all that. They also seemed to really enjoy that, and we got a lot of good ideas just from the discussion about it. So I think that CTAC agreed that we should bring this up every meeting to chat about and say, let's keep that conversation going. Or, ooh, did you know about this group, the New Virginia Majority? Or there's a new group that's active. Or this group is really vocal about an issue that's related to the work we're doing. So we should make sure we go and talk to them.
Holly, neither Don or I were able to make it to the last meeting, so
Okay.
we missed the assignment.
You missed your homework, okay.
But just thinking about it, it would be helpful if you provided me with some bullet points of discussion, questions or discussion points, that sort of an outline of how you have seen that discussion go, and would lead the answers to get back to sort of what we're looking for as a response to the people that we're talking to. That would make it a lot easier than just going in empty and having to come up with all of that.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
we all have our own experiences and expertise, but you guys are the transportation experts, and we want to be sort of focused on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So two things we produced from that last meeting question was, give me some talking points about what CTAC is, so that when we don't have an active engagement period or anything specific, we can still be talking about what CTAC is. So that was step 1. So we've produced that, and we can reshare that out, and maybe Janice, it should get online somewhere, because I don't actually know that it is living with our committee material, so that you can find it if you miss a meeting. So that exists already, so definitely we can get you that. The second was talking points about a specific engagement activity. So we will give you that for each thing. So once we develop what the long-range transportation engagement activities are, we will say, here are the 2 things we want you to go and ask about, or tell about, or to share. So we would absolutely give you that for each engagement thing that we're asking you to share about. So yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention, there was a great article put out by WHRO this morning about Reconnect Jackson Memorial.
What is WHRO?
I think
It's a Norfolk PBR or NPR station.
Public
Okay,
media,
okay.
it's PBS.
Got it.
It was through them, but it was the Virginia Investigative Journalism group, who actually wrote the article. But they did a really, really great piece on the history of the Reconnect Jackson Ward project and how it's sort of being revived now after kind of a lull through like wait times for federal grants and also discussions and disagreements over what the project was gonna look like. And I thought there was some really interesting work that the investigative journalists did that I think would be good if they were captured officially in the planning process, but it doesn't seem like they were. Like there were a lot of people feeling that reconnecting Jackson Ward isn't actually what the neighborhood needs. And there were some really interesting viewpoints on that. So I think it would be, people who are interested should check that article out, and also getting CTAC connecting with the Reconnect project in some fashion might be a useful outlet for a major project that's about to have a lot of public outreach needs.
Sorry, can you say more about getting CTAC connected with the project to help with public outreach, or getting CTAC connected with the project to learn from the lessons that the article talked about?
I think both, but I was mostly talking in first context, because I don't actually know how the final project is intended to be funded. All of the grant money and everything has been planning related. There hasn't been actual like project money associated with it yet. So I imagine that will result in major transportation projects that will need to be funded. And likely CVTA and the TPO will be involved in some fashion, because that's gonna be an interstate project.
Understood.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Maybe one opportunity would be to share out the article, that if you could share that with us, then we could push it out. But I'm wondering too then, one of the things that we're trying to do, going back to the microtransit presentation at the beginning of the meeting, is to be able to, in these meetings where we don't have an activity ask of you to share about the LRTP or one of the other projects that Miles brought up, something that's sort of current in the landscape of the region's news, and to be able to be equipped to be able to talk with your friends and neighbors, the people in your Who Do You Know network, about something that you were able, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, I'm on this group, I was able to hear this presentation today, did you know that, we've got this new microtransit zone in Powhatan, for example, or something like that. So it's a little bit, Stephanie, back to your question about, what's the level of investment that GRTC or the jurisdiction are putting into awareness, but then what's the sort of grassroots way that we could spread the word as well. But I'm thinking about, Andrew, your point, and that could be a future topic that we think about bringing to the CTAC from an educational perspective. So one of the things that we're thinking about at the staff level is how do we not just go through the steps of the planning process, because real life is happening out in the region. So how do we bring relevant content to you as CTAC members to just be educated, to continue to feed your learning on the issues that are out there, even if they're not directly connected right now to the work that's in our planning cycle. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
So that could be like an opportunity to have the first portion of our meeting with that kind of lunch and learn. I'm sorry, that's not what we call it on the agenda, but the focus on regional transportation, that could be one of the topics that gets scheduled for a future meeting.
And RHA, I think, would be a great presentation topic, because they've been doing outreach about the replacement of all of the public housing in Richmond, and that's obviously like a massive public outreach. Like they have to talk to every single person who lives there and get their feedback and make sure that they're satisfied with the outcome. And that's like a huge undertaking, and I'm sure they have an enormous amount of lessons learned that they could share.
I feel like you're saying if I'm hearing you right, you're expressing exactly what we had sort of hoped that this committee will move into, is this opportunity to think about how do we take what we're seeing across the region and learn from it, but then also how do we become more kind of a coordinated voice to be able to get participant and active community involvement into the decision-making process. So that's awesome, thank you.
Sarah? Yeah, I have a couple questions for folks. Did everyone get the email that Holly is referring to about the climate?
No.
It was probably
I don't
2
recall
months ago
seeing it.
now, yeah. I only sent it one time, so maybe
I got it.
more communication would be better. I was find the balance of not bothering you too many times, but maybe that's something we could send a little more regularly.
Yes, is everyone,
When was it sent?
everyone's okay with being bothered a little bit?
It was probably right after the last meeting, so 2 months ago. Bother you a little more with good info? Okay. Okay.
You can always email me.
Okay, all right, everybody email Andrew. No, great, thank you. Good question.
And then is everyone who's like in a locality feeling good about the Who's in My Community resources that they have or that they worked on?
Would it be helpful, since some folks said they weren't here, that to maybe either provide that offline in like a one-on-one, or set some cadence to revisit that Who's in My Community over the course of the meeting schedules?
Yeah, I also wasn't here when we worked on it.
Yeah, that's right.
Town,
It was your
so-
idea that we took,
So
yeah.
I didn't, yeah, I didn't to see it in action,
In
but
action.
yeah, if
Should we-
people would like to.
Should we try to put that back on September's agenda, just to ground it now and
Yes.
in the LRTP?
Yeah, and I think we should revisit it every time. Andrew took a stab at digitizing it, which we shared at the last meeting, but knowing that that's work to maintain is like, we wanna be careful about not saying, we're gonna stand up this resource, but just checking back with you all about it. It was helpful for me to see the spreadsheet, just to say, oh yeah, look at all those good ideas in one place, so we can reshare that out as well, because it's just a digital scan of all of our input, yeah.
And then my last question is, the Who's in My Community sheet as it was designed was kind of like for folks who are part of a locality, but do people that are representing organizations feel like they have direction, or that they wanna be added in somewhere, or that we wanna form small teams, or I don't know? Did everyone do the worksheet?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody did who was here, right? Is there anybody who's missing? I know there were some folks who were new. Stephanie, you got one, right? I gave it to you. Did I give it to you? Gosh, now I'm thinking, like, I'm pretty sure I sent it to you.
I'm trying to
Okay.
just double check,
Okay.
whether I know you sent it or not.
Yeah.
Are we talking about the
It's like a grid.
spreadsheet?
Yeah, well, it's like a grid form. Okay. The spreadsheet was the digitized version of everybody's answers.
Okay, I did see the
So
spreadsheet.
it might be easier just to fill it out in spreadsheet form now that it exists in spreadsheet form.
Yeah.
But this, we can resend this just to say, what are the places in your neighborhood? Yeah. Is there anybody online? I guess just it's Powhatan, right? Who's online?
No,
Did he leave?
he did.
Okay,
We don't have anyone online now.
okay. Yeah, great question, Sarah, thank you.
There it is.
So do we want to agree that by September, we want to try to hit 2 more places in our community? And if you have not done the exercise or you're not sure, I think maybe reach out to either Sarah, myself, Andrew, who said you can email him about everything, and say, hey, let's find some folks. And we will revisit the talking points that we want to send you, and then we'll have some specific asks. We will definitely have some specific asks about the rural transportation, because that's the next engagement opportunity we're working on. So there will be things coming soon about the rural transportation input, so likely either things we want you to share out or to give your input on specifically. So yes, that will be coming. Okay.
I'm gonna go ahead and reach out to Senior Connections. I think I know a guy there who I can share it with.
Someone who's not Tony? No, you have extra connections
I'll
there.
reach out to Tony and
Okay.
explain CTAC to him.
Excellent, I like it. Thank you. So the last part of my section is about CTAC membership. So we had, well, 2 things. And Martha's gonna continue this conversation because we have some things to say about succession and leadership and voting, but we have 12 spots for at-large organizations that have 2 seats each, right? So a designee and an alternative. We have 10 of those spots claimed, which means there are 2 spots that are unclaimed for organizations. And I think that I brought this up probably a few months ago when I first started, just to ask the question, are all the right people on this committee who are in the room? Or if there are specific folks that we want to reach out to, especially as we have this nod to equity and ensuring that diverse communities are being considered for all of these things that affect us, are the right people on CTAC that need to address that? So I want us to just keep asking that of ourselves periodically, and because we have an opening. If there are organizations that want to be added, it's actually the policy board have to approve the appointment essentially. And so I wanted to just say, hey, if that's someone you know, let's do that. And then we have a request from an organization who actually asked, hey, can I be a part of CTAC? And so At our Plan RVA Day, or our day of kind of learning and networking we had in June, someone from Drive Smart Virginia, they're a 501c3 traffic safety nonprofit, asked if they could be a part of the committee. And so, not that we have to decide that right now, but I wanted to ask the group, is that kind of organization the right organization? Should we say yes to them if folks are asking? Are they meeting the needs of the gaps that we have? And then is there anybody else who's not in the room organizationally representing different communities who should be, that we could start, continuing that conversation of building relationships?
If any of us think of someone who should we
talk to?
funnel that person
Yeah.
to?
I don't know, who's the best person to, me? Yeah, okay, me, send it to me. H. Gordon at Plan RVA. Yes.
I mean, I tend to just send anything like that to Ken because I've known Ken
Sure,
a long time,
Yeah.
but I mean, I'll try to remember.
that's fine. Ken and I, we
If
can
you
talk.
send it to Ken, it will
Get to me.
so Ken's gonna be a part of the conversation no matter what, so.
Yeah.
Right.
He didn't know.
Ken's helping keep us
Yeah.
organized, yeah. You're keeping us together, giving us that good history, thank you.
And again, just to be clear, this is additional membership for outside organizations and whatnot. This isn't, we're not talking about the jurisdictional representation, which is another issue we're still working on.
But these will be at-large, not voting members.
Sorry, they're voting members of CTAC, they're just called at-large appointments. The name,
Okay.
all the organizational reps that are not jurisdiction reps.
So RABA is one of the 12
Right.
at-large, and we have two that have there are 12 at-large organizations that can be identified to have a representative, and we've only ever filled 10 of those 12
Okay.
spots.
I had a quick question, just kind of in line with what you were asking, Holly, about equity and about what CTAC's approach to equity is and how you've discussed, going about actually fulfilling those goals, if you have specific goals that are written, and do we have like equity experts in CTAC or, anything like that?
So I think the short answer is I don't know that we have a specific outlined process for that, and that we could probably pay more attention to that. Martha's in a minute gonna talk about this equity work group that we have not stood up yet, that may help us get there, so I might just defer to that section. I think it's good for us to have this conversation, because I don't know that we have specifically outlined that, and probably could get a little closer to doing that.
Yeah, I definitely think that having like a working definition of what we want to achieve and what even what we believe equity is, and then also like why do we want to be equitable, and because I think that would really help us as far as your question with what organizations should be in this room, then we can have a very clear way of addressing that. Like for me, I can say, this is my second meeting here, but I can already say, like, it would be great to have more Black and brown people in the room, right?
Yeah.
Who are people who are representing and equity to me goes beyond race, but race is absolutely very important as well, so that's just one observation, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the formal process is. Obviously, the policy board has to say yes. We have a request from Drive Smart. I suppose if we think that's something we care about, do we want to say yes to that now, or is that a staff decision?
Could there be a, just hearing about this now, brainstorming, but I wonder if there couldn't be like some information provided to the members of the CTAC about what the organization is. And then that could be a discussion item at the next committee meeting, and then we could forward that recommendation
After that.
accordingly to the policy board.
Holly, a number of years ago, we had a subcommittee who came up with a whole list of organizations, primarily representing the, the EDA? What was the
EDAC.
name of the?
Yeah, EDAC.
Whatever it was. And we reached out to them and determined who of them would be interested in being a part of the organization. So that might be a base if you have access. I know that Ken was involved in that. If you have access to that list, it might give you a list of organizations at that point that a subcommittee of this committee came up with.
Okay, we can do that.
I have that.
Okay, we can do that. Thank you.
And if we've only got 2 open slots, I think it's too early to decide on filling one of those slots, because we don't know who else might be available, who might have strong individuals who feel strongly that they're going to be active and going to be engaging in the process.
Mr. Upton, I would tend to agree with you. I would say that maybe the homework then for the committee would be to brainstorm what other groups might be appropriate to consider in conjunction with this request. It would be hard to turn down an organization that's interested in volunteering on the basis that we don't know who else is interested if we haven't been active in filling that spot, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, however, we've had several organizations that have been outspoken at our meetings, and this was some time ago, but they were outspoken, many of us thought, to meet their own company and their own organization's needs, not necessarily to meet the needs of the entire community. So I'm not saying that that may be this case, but we've had that happen in the past.
To meet that point then, would it be helpful for us to have on the next committee agenda, in light of this request and in light of this discussion, because I think what I'm hearing you say is maybe we need to take a beat and have an opportunity for this committee to develop a bit of a profile of what beyond what the bylaws say, what the purpose of those 12 organizations are and kind of what that expectation is, so that we avoid kind of the individual interests prevailing over the greater good. Could that be something we could do in the next agenda?
Yeah, I don't want to lose the momentum, and I think we have exciting conversations about this, and then we don't meet for 2 months, and because we have some active things that we do want participation in, and I think there's an opportunity to really get folks that could help us meet those goals. I don't wanna wait for one to get to the other, so I would like to probably move that along quickly.
Because I think you raise a good point. I was thinking about it from the fact of, how do you say no to someone when but I think what you're saying is, let's create the grounds, the basis for which we want people to know that they would be a good fit here.
Yeah.
I've just offered my humble input.
It's appreciated.
I do agree with that, though. I think if we're gonna fill 2 spots, we should think a little bit about gaps in the knowledge of this group and also make sure that, like, we're not just picking people who want to be involved, but we're picking people who we would want to be involved, like voices that we want to be hearing. I know to what Stephanie said, I know NAACP is one of the groups on this committee, but I don't know that I've seen them bid. So I wonder if there would be an appetite to reaching out to groups that have not been attending regularly and ask if they're still interested in holding a spot, or if they would recommend somebody like a different organization that they feel would like represent their priorities on this group, but would be more able to participate.
That's a good suggestion. Yep, great.
Yeah, I had that same thought, Andrew, because I've heard NAACP, but also didn't see anyone hear from them. And I wonder if in reaching out to their representative, it would be, if they're willing to give their honest feedback as to why they're not showing up.
Right.
Like why, because there's probably, good reasons, so, and that could be really valuable feedback for this group. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So I think that's all that I wanted to talk about there. Do you want to segue into your pieces?
Yeah, I'm conscious we're losing people, so I'll try to go quickly. For those that don't know me, my name is Martha Schickel. I'm the executive director here at Plan RVA. And if you, by chance, had tuned into the joint annual meeting that we hosted on June 13th, the policy board took action to elect me as the secretary of the RRTPO, and the commission took action to appoint me as the director of the RRTPO. So on the staff side, I serve as the staff point of contact for management of the TPO, and then on the policy board side, I'm the non-voting person that's responsible for the record keeping and the operations of the organization. So I have been at Plan RVA as the executive director for the last 8 years, so I'm not new to this universe. I'm just probably new to this table for those of you, and have come in and out of the CTAC meetings over the last 8 years, kind of at different times, particularly when we've been in transition with directors of transportation. Miles Bushing is the director of transportation at Plan RVA. He is the lead staff person for the technical aspects of the planning, and he's gonna continue to play the same role that you have known him to play in providing that context. I'm just here more for the governance piece of things and to be able to handle the administrative functions of the organization. So where you know Chet Parsons, who have been involved, those two roles were combined into one position, and we've made that decision to split those roles into two different positions that already existed within the agency. And I'm happy to talk kind of more about that if it's helpful, but just wanted to give that context. So that's why I'm here to talk about governance. Typically at the start of the fiscal year, this is the first meeting of the CTAC after the new fiscal year began on July 1st. We would be having a discussion about leadership succession, the bylaws and the bylaws and the non-binding guidance document for the CTAC articulate a leadership rotation for the election of the chair of the CTAC to rotate in a specific order by jurisdiction among, and the eligible persons to serve as the chair or the vice chair of CTAC are the locality representatives. I just wanted to frankly bring you news today that in the rotation, the representative following Richmond that would naturally be in the rotation is the representative from Powhatan, which we do not currently have. And the representative after that renew the cycle, which is from Hanover. And so I think what we wanted to share with you today is that from a staff perspective, we do not feel like we have the ability to make the recommendation to you about how to move forward. The bylaws and guidance document are a little bit disjointed in what do you do when there's a vacancy in the locality. And so we feel like there's an opportunity to fold this into the broader discussion you were just having about membership and membership engagement, and how do we really make sure that this is as attractive as an organization as possible to be a part of, but then also to make sure that the leadership goes. So we don't want to leave Sarah in a status of limbo, but we were wondering if it might be the consensus of the committee to allow her to continue her term until we can get guidance from Dr. Newbill, the newly elected chair of the TPO Policy Board, whose responsibility is to make sort of the final determination about where we go from here on leadership.
So moved.
Okay. At the same time, I think we want to make this as kind of a consensus-driven process as possible. And so if there are members who have a desire to want to kind of step into or to support someone in stepping into a leadership role, we want to be as open as that. The guidance documents are clear that the rotation is a non-binding guidance. We just didn't want to catch anybody by surprise by actually putting election on the agenda today and not realizing that, by skipping several localities, they were all of a sudden kind of up next. Also didn't want to catch you by surprise either, but we were thinking that frankly, if you were willing, then we would just sort of keep things status quo until we could have another conversation and do a little bit more reach out with the localities to see what the preference is, and then be able to report that back to Dr. Newbill. If you want to do a motion, that's great, but.
Is it okay with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, is anyone else interested in sitting here with this guy?
I'll say that, I offered it when you first became chair, but I'm happy to support, chair, however you want, splitting it with the Richmond's representative, so if you want to stay in position and then you can share whatever you want, that way you're not just share forever.
Share forever.
So just let me know.
Okay.
If you want support in that.
Are you interested in being the chair?
I could be, but try not, I'm fine with whatever,
Okay.
honestly. But I wanted to express, if we wanted to just keep things, but you also didn't want to continue doing everything for chair, then I'm happy to help with that.
Yeah, that sounds great. I don't know. We can talk about it afterwards, or do we have to make a vote?
when do we have to make a decision by?
Yeah.
I think if everyone's okay with maintaining the status quo, then we don't have to make a decision today other than we're gonna keep this on the docket moving forward to get to final.
Okay.
Okay.
For closure, okay, well, thank you for
So
that.
you say the rotation is not binding.
Correct.
It's not in our bylaws.
Right, so there's bylaws and they specify the composition of the committee membership, it doesn't specify the leadership piece. And so there's a non-binding guidance document that was created and adopted in 2018 by the policy board, and it specifies the rotation. It also says, in the event a jurisdictional representative is unable to serve, and I would count a vacancy as that, as CTAC chair or vice chair, when required by rotational schedule, the MPO chair shall appoint a chair or vice chair for the CTAC for that term. So technically speaking, it is Dr. Newbill's responsibility to give this committee that guidance on leadership. I just felt, and in talking with her at the beginning of July, it would be beneficial to this group to be able to have some conversation and weigh in on that before she just made a determination. And that is definitely consistent with her leadership style, to not want to just make a decision in a vacuum, but to hear from the group. And to Sarah's point, to be able to make the invitation that if someone is willing to raise their hand, that's always preferred, so we can maybe do some communication afterwards to reiterate that there's an open chair and vice chair seat, given the fact that we can't fill it by the rotation. And, that would be an opportunity to talk about, what capacity folks felt like to raise their hand to volunteer before being told.
Usually, if I understand the rotation, Sarah would be the chair, and then Powhatan would be the vice chair. Is that how it normally is done?
That would be, for the year just ending June 30th, that would be what it is, yeah. And so then that would mean that Powhatan would be in line to take the chair.
But since we don't have, who would be?
Hanover.
Sorry?
Hanover.
Hanover, okay.
And we just don't have a lot of engagement right now in that appointment either. And so we just don't want to catch anybody by surprise.
Of course, that goes back to the bigger problem.
Yes.
With the activity level of the jurisdictional assigned representatives, and what's the disconnect there?
Correct.
Who's after Hanover?
Henrico. Then it's Charles City.
Who's also vacant.
And then Chesterfield. So, again, that's why we wanted to just put this out for transparency's sake and not just haphazard, not systematically move down the list without bringing it to the group for awareness.
I think we are all very satisfied with the leadership that we've had for the last whatever. Sarah, thank you. And thank you for being willing to continue along with Andrew's.
Yeah.
My thought was, since Andrew threw his hat in, and since we don't have Powhatan, and there's, well, we won't get into Hanover. I've got my own opinions. But maybe we might look to Andrew as vice chair. Without succession, but for the next term anyhow. If Sarah's not able to make it, then Andrew would be the designated person to come in.
I think given, this is just my reaction on that as not an expert in parliamentary procedure, but given the lack of specificity that our guidance documents provide, that probably would be fine. We could let everybody think about that, and we could have it on the agenda for action for next month. I don't see anything in here that expressly prohibits an alternate of the same locality serving in that role. I do think that we should consult with Dr. Newbill to confirm that she's okay with that. And I would just name, because she raised it to me, being the representative on the policy board from the city of Richmond, and the fact that Dyrona Clark from the city of Richmond was elected as the TAC chair. I think we just want to move into that conversation with awareness and transparency. That if that's the comfort zone of everyone, then that should be said, but we want to make sure that everybody's aware that would put sort of the full stack of leadership in the city of Richmond appointees.
Well, take away the technical complexity that I hear. Maybe could it be that the alternate typically stands in place of the person they're alternate for? And would that could that be construed to say that if Sarah's not here, then her alternate at Richmond would stand in her stead until we have
That
other things
seems
change?
very reasonable.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew.
I'll remain assistant to the chair.
Thank you all for that.
Thanks.
The second piece of it is in my mind sort of a weave together of the discussion around membership that Holly broached, and then also Stephanie, your comments around equity. The bylaws, again, I'll refer back to them, simply have a paragraph that state that the CTAC will be supported by a standing committee addressing equity and the needs of the transportation disadvantaged. This subcommittee will be called the CTAC Transportation Equity Work Group. And the purpose of this subcommittee is to advise the MPO through the CTAC on issues, plans, studies, and other matters concerning the MPO's 3C urban transportation planning process that affects transportation disadvantaged populations. This group should have flexible membership to maximize the opportunity for input on issues relative to equity for transportation disadvantaged populations. I believe that that is an opportunity for a working group to do what you suggested, to define what equity means, what are those goals that are being, and really to be able to take the data that we already have around who and where are our transportation disadvantaged communities and what is the most appropriate way to outreach and serve those communities. The question that we wanted to bring to this group today, after an internal discussion, is given the engagement that we have on the CTAC body itself, is it appropriate to form a subcommittee? It could be an opportunity to bring additional folks into the conversation where there's a defined number of people that can serve on CTAC. This could be a way to engage more people in the conversation. However, that also means that we run the risk of having two committees that we struggle to preserve engagement. And so we wanted again to put this on the table for consideration and I think continued conversation at the next meeting about what you think might be best. Should the Transportation Equity Work Group be a committee of the whole of the CTAC? Is there an interested group of folks that might be interested in helping to initially seed this membership of the subcommittee? What direction would you give to us and how to stand it up appropriately? We are mindful that this has been something that was established at the conclusion of the merger of the EDAC and the CTAC, and it has yet to have been developed. And so we want to make sure that as we head into our next certification process, and in light of the work that we need to do this year to develop the long-range transportation plan, we're pulling every lever we can to make sure that our transportation disadvantaged have connection into the process. So it was a lot. I'm sorry to be the one at the end of the meeting kind of throwing these pieces on to you, and we can come up with a way, I think, to more concisely communicate this. But as staff, we think that it's important to keep this on the agenda until we have a game plan for how to fulfill that commitment, if that's okay with you. So it sounds like we have a lot of agenda items for the next meeting around engagement and membership and how to move this equity work group effort forward. I would say if you have thoughts, you'd be welcome to reach out to me directly or anybody on staff so that we can start to collect those opinions as you're thinking about it over the next 2 months moving forward.
When can people fill vacancies? So like if,
Time.
okay, so if we knew people in any of these localities and we were like,
Absolutely,
get them in here,
absolutely, yeah.
what do they have to fill out?
It's a local appointment, and so it is dictated by whatever that process is locally. What we could do is a little bit of homework on our side to see what that looks like. Like in the city, you have to fill out an application, right? And so that's not the same in every locality. But we can do some homework to send out, this is how one in this locality could express interest. We can do that for you.
Do we know if all the localities are willing to appoint like just regular citizens? Cause like Sarah and I applied online and were chosen through that process, but I know that some localities may be like the council picks somebody who is like at the locality that works there. So do we know if they're all like
I think,
not random people, but like
yeah, I think The roots of this committee used to have in its title the Citizen Transportation Advisory Committee, and so I think that there's an implied that this is a non-staff member. We don't have anything in our governance documents that would preclude a staff member from filling that role. We changed citizen to community to be more inclusive. But I think it is really up to the locality to determine who they think would be best to fill the position, given the charge of this committee to be focused on citizen input. Or public input, I should have said. We can follow up on those questions. Two other things I wanted to cover, just to kind of get you through the end of the agenda. The agency updates are included there for your reference. Couple things I wanted to just hit on the RRTPO update. Just wanted to let you know, and for the sake of your calendars, you will be receiving communication, most likely from Janice, that announces an invitation to attend a tour of the Virginia port facilities. So the RRTPO Policy Board has initiated this effort. Dorian, who you heard about from Miles, has been working with the Port of Virginia folks to put together a visit. And so the invitation will go to Policy Board members, TAC members, CTAC members, and then the overflow of spots that we have will be extended an invitation to CVTA and Commission Plan RVA members. The date is, the date is October 3rd. It will be a morning start time with a post-lunch end time. So it is the majority of the business day that will be consumed by this. We'll be boarding buses here in Richmond in the morning, and we'll be riding to Hampton Roads to visit one or more of the port facilities there. Based on numbers, we'll know more about those details once we know how many people we're accommodating. And then we'll have lunch and then come back and visit the Port of Richmond here in the city, and then would return back to let everybody off the bus and go on with their day and their schedule. So just wanted to let you know that. More communication will be coming fairly soon about that information and how to express interest, and then ultimately how to register. For those of you that are not familiar, because of the security requirements for the port facilities, we do need to travel together, and we will need to have specific registration information provided in advance, because we have to get everybody, we're expecting a large number of people to be able to get through the security clearance process. So it's just not feasible to have 50 to 75 to 100 people driving separately to Hampton Roads and then all trying to screen. It would take the entire program time of the trip to be able to get that done. So we'll share more information as it's available, but wanted that to get on your calendars as soon as possible. And then lastly, we just wanted to update you that we have flagged a conflict in our internal schedules for the September CTAC meeting. And so wanted to let you know that we do need to find a new time for that. And we can send out a poll, or we can send out just a newly revised date. And just wanted to hear how that lands with you. I know everybody's time is precious, and we don't want to make you feel like we're just moving things around on your calendar for no reason, but as soon as we noticed it, we realized we needed to bring it up today.
Just a clarifying question, is it like a conflict with that specific Thursday, or is it a conflict with the time off?
No, just that particular September 19th day and time, yeah. So we'd be looking to reschedule it earlier in the week prior, the week after, something kind of in that September timeframe to be able to just accommodate this one-time conflict that we have.
Okay.
Is it okay if we just look internally at calendars and push out a new date, or would you prefer to have more of a choice in it?
Or a doodle poll maybe?
We can do that, would that be the preferred?
Give us a couple of options.
Yep, thank you.
On everybody's schedule.
Thank you, it's really helpful. I think I blended a couple of those things together, I was talking fast, but those were my updates.
Okay.
Skipped around on you, sorry.
No, you're good. We're down here are there any member comments before we are nearing the end of this meeting?
I'm sorry if you said this, but am I understanding that you'll be joining us regularly at meetings from now on?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wasn't sure from the way you described the position.
Oh, yeah, that's my intention. So Miles and I both will be participating actively in policy board and executive committee meetings. Miles will be the dominant with his team participants in the TAC meetings, and I'll be the dominant with this team that you see here in the, not dominant, that sounds really bad, doesn't it? We'll be present in that, and then Miles and I work together to make sure that the flow of the subcommittee meetings work into the full policy board agenda.
I have a quick comment that RVA Rapid Transit, we were very sad to miss Plan RVA Day, but it was on the same day as our State of Transit reception, so it was totally impossible. So maybe next year we could coordinate a little better, because we would have loved to be there, you know, and I think we also had some other like elected officials who probably would have, I don't know, I think they came to your Plan RVA Day.
We were pushing people
Yeah,
to.
we teed it up.
You did, oh, thank you.
We're like, hey, if you're excited, now go see them after you leave here.
It was
I think
a-
some people definitely did.
Some people did, yeah, I know, I think
But
a
noted
lady
and-
from Chesterfield County actually came through and,
Yeah.
but she was tired, and we were like, I'm so sorry, and we really wanted to come to
It was a
support
day,
y'all
yeah.
too,
Thank
so
Yeah.
next
It
year,
was a
let's.
good day, and I will say, our goal, should I say this now? Should I make the announcement?
That we're gonna combine and change, yeah.
So our goal is actually to combine the transportation forum and Plan RVA Day, so it's more of a unified, kind of comprehensive look at regional planning. And the hope is that the CTAC will be actively involved in the planning of that content, and we have not, for that reason, decided on when the day will be, and we'll love to talk with you all about that further and sort of be able to do. We've been tethered the last 2 years to the commission or the TPO meeting schedule, and this gives us the freedom to be able to pick a day that fits kind of the community region calendar better.
That would be awesome.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Final thoughts? Anyone? Okay. Sorry, motion to adjourn? Thank you.
Then we go to Gavin.